of the things that comes into play. So there's gravity, there's rotation and buoyancy, and the dynamics of living need to be within these realms. So in outer space, you take away gravity, but you also take away rotation, so buoyancy is there. So no, I do not believe when Einstein says we're in a perpetual fall. We don't have gravity, we don't have rotation. So buoyancy now is the high dynamic. So it's almost that we're incapable of falling. And we know that too because if you watch an astronaut, again, he's not making a preventative move for fall. That's right. So if our system knows falling, and I know Einstein gets pretty elaborate that at that moment falling through space, you don't realize because there's no force of gravity. Yeah, you do. And that's why people don't jump off of buildings just for the heck of it. We have bungee jumping, but there's still a cord attached, or skydiving. There's still that knowing of it's not that perpetual fall because, again, at a perpetual fall, you don't want to fall. So buoyancy is very gravity related, but in the opposite. So similar to gravity that if I were to drop this, you have a perpendicular fall, right? So I'm trying to do this with what props I have, but if I press this down, it will come back up in a sense, that same 90-degree angle. So if I drop this in slow motion, right? Now, when you're talking about the perpetual fall, if I were to drop this, you're not going to have the ball coming out of the water, right? It maintains where it is in space. No matter what I do, it's going to stay together. Now, you and I being living organisms, and this is where, again, Einstein was a bit incorrect, but again, he did what he did with the mechanics. So his whole thing is when the train was coming to a stop and then the balloon was disengaging from the in all of this kind of thing, and then the clocks are going this way. I totally get it, especially if you're in Europe. Now, for an American, they don't understand what coming into these train stations is and that sensation of going forward and backwards. We just don't have the same systems. So visualization techniques, and again, time being relative, but if that's the case too, then movement is relative because you're watching me. For someone who is watching me from here or someone from her from behind, they will get a different reference of movement. So you can use that same concept to movement just as much as you can with time. But that's where, again, we're getting a little bit into the philosophies, and I'm into the tangibles. Gravity doesn't pull you to the ground. It will pull this to the ground. So if I come here with my ball, right, it'll regulate off of buoyancy and find its absolute horizon. But these are masses. Even though air and water, you can give the argument that it's it's not. They're still, they respond to gravity in the masses. So if I let go of this cup, you will see the cup smashed into 1,000 pieces because in a sense, that's what you're saying, gravity pulled it down. But what it is, that cup doesn't have rotational principles or properties. It doesn't respond with rotation. It doesn't have buoyancy. Therefore, gravity is the dominant, right? So when I have rotation, right, I in a sense, orbit the Earth. I have this binding force, but it's not a pulling force because I have these movements. Now, if I suddenly had surgery and I've just come out and I have anesthesia, the troponin hit that I'm having to my muscles, I have very little rotational response. So yes, that's the sensation of gravity pulling me. That's why just the thought of going to the bathroom, now you can blame it on pain, you can blame it on disorganization, but what's going on right now is the force of gravity is now your system is organizing to succumbing to gravity. When the mass supersedes the might, right, then the mass will win. There's just no way around it. Now, you can say that about a book. So here's my skull in 1,000 pieces, right? This is the human head. So imagine, right, and this is where my sick visualization techniques come into play. So obviously I have, my skull's not like this, but when I go to sit up, there's a condensation or a point where the human body, even just minutely, will condense or push down, right? It will push down very similar to these balls, right? And so the buoyancies come into play. So when I go to sit up, I don't just rise, but the body will naturally shift its weight and go for a quick check to see where it is within its buoyancy principles, because it'll be different, let's say at 7,000 feet than it would be at sea level, right? And so my body makes that check, and that initiation, and that's why babies bounce. They bounce first before they go into locomotion, because that bounce now lets them fall. And so at a cellular level, the cells know how much oxygen, in a sense, to collect. and allow, and that's where the skeletal system comes up, and that's where you're getting that buoyancy from, right? And so, and it happens in the eyes. It happens at a cellular level, but the skeletal system is really key in that, and it's not a principle that anybody's really looked into that I can find. And actually, one of my biggest ahas was really Victor Schauberger with his water vortexing and how he pulled the logs down. He was a park ranger, and he found the energy in water. And I don't mean energy, but I mean he used that rotational double vortex to pull the logs down versus digging canals. He just placed rocks strategically, very much like we have a bronchial system within our lungs. So when I draw my breath, I'm not just filling an open sac, right? It goes into these tributaries. Well, these tributaries create a force to bring the oxygen down all the way, which is again a form of buoyancy. But see, our buoyancy can happen in all directions. The thought that you're being let gravity pull you back down is actually neurologically not stable for your system, because we need that like push to expand. So when I go to sit up, if you actually watch me in slow motion, I'm not just rising to the occasion, right? I'm not Frankenstein going into that. I have these compressive. So even if you look at my hands here, my muscles aren't going, it's not that. I know how to play with buoyancy, so I'm pushing down and allowing, I'm playing off of gravity. So I can do this with my hands in all directions, and that's what makes me movement lesson, right? Most people want to do more like a piano or grab, or because again, with these immature responses, they're looking for a more muscle-based, right? But see, if you're in outer space, right, and all of this is happening, and that's where the tongue articulation, and then you get back, and it's literally like, oh. And that's when you see an astronaut afterwards, how was the ride? And it's like, oh, how do I even open my eyes? Right? The speech is gone and balance is gone. All those things are gone. But what's really gone are these principles of buoyancy within the system.